Chapter 47. I had also met an employee of Security Solutions myself on several occasions. His name was Carl, and he had provided security for a couple of campus events. I was pretty sure he liked me, or at least found me vaguely amusing, and might be willing to give me some insider info. But I didn't know his last name, or what kind of details he usually worked, or how to get in touch with him. I tried a few internet searches to see if I could track him down, but came up with nothing. I didn't dare reach out to the company itself. Not only did I not want to tip them off that Dima was interested in them, and that I was connected to Dima, but I was pretty sure I was right near the top of their shit list. Getting the company owner's son and heir arrested for drug dealing and sexual assault last spring had probably not ingratiated me with them at all. Better if I didn't bring myself to their attention. But I still had Camilla. She had agreed to a Skype call with me on Thursday afternoon. If that went well, she'd relayed through John, she'd consider talking to Dima. At 2 p.m. that Thursday, I was waiting by the computer, my stomach fluttering almost as much as if I were about to have, shudder, an interview. I told myself there was no reason to be nervous. Camilla was the one who should be nervous. In fact, she probably was nervous. But somehow, even so, I was nervous too. When she appeared on my screen, though, she didn't appear nervous. From what I could see of her, she was on the short side, with a compact athletic frame that her pantsuit couldn't quite disguise, long dark hair that today was pulled back in a low ponytail, and big dark eyes that had a no-nonsense look. She was in every way the opposite of every other woman I'd ever known John to go out with. "Wow," she said as soon as the video and audio had synced up. "John said you looked like him, but I didn't realize how much." She had a faint North Carolina accent, with an even fainter underlay of Mexico. Born here, I guessed, but in a family that mainly spoke Spanish at home. So probably bilingual as well as a lawyer. I gave John even more kudos. I also wondered how on earth he'd ended up with her. Asking Camilla would probably be wrong, right? At least during our first chat. I'd interrogate her about it later. "2 peas in a pod, that's us," I said. "Though he said you don't act like him much." "Well," I said, "it depends on how you define it." Camilla laughed, flashing straight white teeth. "I like it. A good lawyer answer. Although John says you're a professor." "Yep." "I guess it's kind of similar, though. You're always having to do lots of reading and research and be clever with words." "Pretty much," I agreed. Camilla still didn't seem nervous at all. That only made me feel even more nervous. "Anyway," she said, "John tells me you want to find out more about Security Solutions." I outlined the situation briefly, explaining that Dima was doing a story on them and wanted to talk to someone who might have some insider info, or at least had dealt with them. "Well," she said, "I can't say I have insider info exactly. Although, maybe... Do you think he'd be interested in their ties with extremist groups?" I sat up. "I'm sure he would be." She nodded. "Okay, so I guess I should give you a little background. Someone reached out to me a few months back. A friend asking for some advice. This friend had gotten out of the military and been hired by Security Solutions." I nodded. He had some qualms about what they do, but he really needed the work, and they were the only game in town. I nodded some more. "And at first it didn't seem too bad, especially not for what it was. And he was mostly treated pretty well. It was a diverse group of employees. My friend is Hispanic, most of them ex-military, so he felt at home, surrounded by professionals. At least, at first." Camilla paused. I nodded encouragingly. Then some new guys came in, and they weren't so welcoming and professional. A couple of them were ex-military, but several of them weren't, although they knew their way around guns well enough. And then my friend started noticing the numbers they had tattooed on their bodies. Numbers like 14, 18, 88, and 109/110. Neo-Nazi codes, I said. Camilla gave me an approving smile. You know your neo-Nazi symbology, I see. Not very well, although more than I'd like to. I had to do a bit of a dive into it recently. Yeah, me too. And for the amount of effort those people put into creating and deciphering codes and symbols, they could get a PhD in literature. She stopped. Oops, I forgot. I didn't mean to offend you. No offense, I said. And it might be true. Although I'd argue that those of us with actual PhDs in literature generally read better texts and provide more subtle and nuanced interpretations of them. Hopefully more socially valuable interpretations, too. But it's the same basic impulse. Yeah. So, anyway, my friend asked me about it, and we both looked into it a bit, and it looks like Security Solutions has started hiring from a couple of paramilitary-type groups with extremist views and connections to white supremacy and neo-Nazism. Yowza, I said. Yowza indeed. Needless to say, my friend was not happy about it. He was even less happy about it when a couple of them started hassling him about it. They started telling him to go back home and blaming him for global warming. Nice, I said. Real nice. First, he complained to his supervisor, but that only got him more harassment. Eventually, he found another job and left. His new job doesn't pay as well, but it involves fewer Nazis, so he was willing to make the trade. Makes sense, I said, although it sucks that he had to do it. Yeah, we talked about whether or not it was worth suing over, but he decided he didn't want to go through with it. But he might be willing to talk to your journalist friend about it. That would be great, I said. I've had some other run-ins with Security Solutions, Camilla said. They're based in Georgia, but they've been stretching their tentacles up here into North Carolina, hoping to get a piece of that private prison pie. We've been cutting back on them, but there are still a few, and SS, my nickname for them, would like to get some of that Raleigh money. So if you need more info, I might have it, but the neo-Nazi angle is the most lurid, so I led with it. Thanks, I said. That was great. I mean, not what happened to your friend. That was terrible. But I think my friend might find the story very interesting, if you're willing to share it. I'll get in touch with my friend and see what he says. She grinned. And maybe one day soon, my people will talk with your people and we'll set something up. Or something. And maybe some good will come of it. Yeah, I agreed. Maybe some good will come of it after all. Chapter 48. I had been full of happy fantasies that Camilla's friend would immediately agree, and we'd set up some kind of a meeting that weekend, and it would go really well, and this would in some way make my life go much better. But in fact, she told me the next day that he was thinking about it, and would let us know at some point in the next few weeks if he would be willing to talk to Dima or not. So I had to put that project on the back burner and focus on other things. The other things I needed to focus on included applying for more jobs, polishing up the article I'd been slowly working on all semester, and keeping Chloe from going into a tailspin over the progress of her book, or lack thereof. I did the revisions over the summer and sent them in 3 months ago, she told me, as we sat over cappuccinos at Brews Up on a Monday afternoon. I felt very conspicuous. It was Halloween, and most of the people in the shop were in costumes. Some of them were very sexy costumes. One of the benefits of living in Georgia was that Halloween was often still warm enough to make wearing nothing but a bra, miniskirt, and a pair of ripped stockings seem like a good idea. But they haven't gotten back to me yet, and when I reached out to them about it, they just said it was a slow process and not to worry about it. Did they give you some kind of a timeline for when they would get back to you? I asked. No, just that it would be a while. What about you? Have you heard from your publisher yet? Not yet. A publisher had requested a full copy of my manuscript at the end of the spring semester. They'd been sitting on it ever since. This meant I couldn't submit it elsewhere. Sometimes I thought about checking in with them, but I always chickened out. I was afraid they'd say no, or come back with a lot of really hurtful comments, and then I'd be back at square one as far as publication went, but more bruised and battered. So I'd elected to work on an article while I waited. I couldn't say that I enjoyed writing articles, but it felt productive, and during the drafting phase, I didn't have to deal with the aggravation inherent in any interactions with editors and reviewers. Hi, I didn't expect to run into you girls. It was Diane, coming into the coffee shop with Julie. Here to try the pumpkin cookies? I saw them, but I was too scared, I said. Brews Up was festooned with orange and black streamers, and there were trays of free cookies iced to look like pumpkins set out on the counter. Wise woman, said Diane. They're crap, and all that food coloring can't be good for you. But they're free, so lots of people come and get them. Mostly students, but some faculty too. You know how people are when there's free food. And I guess I can't blame them. I know one of our adjuncts recently had to apply for SNAP benefits to feed her kids. I was shocked, but that's how things are these days, I guess. Chloe and I nodded. Is Melissa with you? Diane asked, looking around. Chloe and I shook our heads. She's at the doctor's, I said. She finally got in to see a specialist she's been trying to see for months, so she's off doing that. Hope it helps, said Diane, but I was hoping to see her since I think she'd be interested in hearing what I've got to say. Do you mind if I sit down? Please. She and Julie took the other 2 chairs at our table. So, said Diane, once they were seated. She put her elbows on the table and rested her chin on her clasped hands. Do you remember when we talked at the beginning of the semester about the... She looked around and lowered her voice. Mold! Chloe and I nodded some more. So I ran some tests like I said I was going to do. You know, taking samples, culturing them, that kind of thing. All in a day's work for me. Anything interesting? I asked. She swayed her shoulders from side to side in a maybe yes, maybe no motion. There's a lot of mold in most of the buildings here on campus, she said. But there's a lot of mold in most places here in Georgia. Some of what I found were species known to be toxic to humans, but again, people will tell you there's mold everywhere, and they're right. Most of it's benign, or in such low quantities that it doesn't matter to most people. Our buildings do appear to have a fair amount of some potentially dangerous varieties, but most health experts will tell you that it's only a concern for transplant or chemo patients or people with late-stage AIDS. Of course, we probably have some of those people here on campus, Julie put in. I know for a fact that someone in our department is undergoing chemo right now, and someone in chemistry just had a transplant, said Diane. But that doesn't explain our problems. I did some reading, though, and it looks like lots of colleges are having this issue. Lots of students are complaining about getting sick from moldy dorms, and faculty and staff are complaining about getting sick from moldy offices and classrooms. Something's bothering them. I've read it could be some kind of an interaction between the mold and the building materials themselves. You know, most of our modern building materials are pretty toxic. The materials from a few decades back are full not just of lead and asbestos, but formaldehyde, and it turns out that's a lot worse for you than we used to think. Some of that's being phased out, but Now we're just starting to find out how much of a problem these things called PFAS chemicals are, and they're in practically every part of our buildings. And our buildings aren't ventilated very well. They're designed to be efficient, not healthy. That's why when one person in your class comes down with a cold, everyone comes down with it. Chloe stifled a sneeze. "Sorry," she said when she could talk again. "I'm actually just getting over a cold. Just like you said, someone came into my class with a cold after fall break, and a week later we were all sick." Diane nodded. "That's how it works. And since I ran into you here, I thought I'd let you know what I've found so far. I'm going to keep reading, keep doing tests and cultures. I could get a major paper out of this. Or get terminated." We sat there in a moment of silence out of respect for the risk to her career. "Anyway, let Melissa know when you see her," Diane said. "If this turns into a major breakthrough for me, I'll owe her. I guess if I get fired, I'll owe her too, but in a different way. Although I decided to do this myself, so I'll have no one to blame but myself and the college's cowardice if they kick me out." "Could they really do that?" Chloe asked. "Don't you have tenure?" "They'd find a way," said Diane. "Even tenured faculty can be gotten rid of if the college wants to badly enough. And if I tell them all their buildings are death traps, they'll want to badly enough." "Could you publish the results anonymously?" I asked. "Or anonymize the test site somehow?" "I'm thinking about how to do that," said Diane. "But then we'll have the issue of me knowing that we're working in an unsafe environment and deliberately choosing not to do anything about it. Also not good, either for my conscience or my legal liability." I said. "But in the meantime, I'm going to keep on going. Just don't tell anyone about it, will you? So far, the only person who knows about it is Julie and you two. And Melissa, if you tell her. But other than that, let's just keep it our little secret for a little while longer, okay?" "No problem," I said, while Chloe made heart-crossing and lip-zipping motions. "And maybe don't spend too much time in any of our buildings," said Diane, "just to be on the safe side." We all looked around Bruise Up. "This place seems pretty safe," Diane said. "Most of the samples I've taken here only show pretty low levels of stuff. And it smells okay, and you don't normally feel bad here, do you?" Chloe and I shook our heads again. "That's a good sign. We spend a lot of time teaching people not to jump to conclusions, which has somehow turned into teaching people not to trust their perceptions. But if you're going to deal with the real world, you have to trust your perceptions. A lot of the time, they're your best defense against danger. Believe in yourself, just like all the songs and motivational talks tell you to. Just don't stop using the scientific method while you're at it." "Always good advice," I said. Chapter 49. It wasn't for another 3 weeks, the Monday before Thanksgiving, that Raoul, Camilla's friend, was finally ready to talk. He had agreed to share his story with Dima, providing I was there to translate, and Camilla was there to provide moral and legal support. I was grateful he had agreed. I wished he had agreed at some other time. I had come back from the ACES convention in D.C., where I had given a paper but not, alas, been invited for any interviews, late Sunday evening. I had class first thing Monday morning, our chat with Raoul Monday evening, and Karen's long-dreaded second observation Tuesday morning, before spending the Thanksgiving holiday helping my parents with their new home site. And I still had a couple more jobs I needed to apply to. So, all in all, not a fun and relaxing week. I tried to convince myself, as I anxiously checked my email for the 30th time Monday afternoon, that I had no reason to be nervous about talking to Raoul. He was going to share his story, but it would have no real effect on me. I was just going to be there as an interpreter for Dima. I was going to spend a significant amount of time on the same video call as Dima. "You can do this! You've spent more time talking to him than you can count." My blatant attempts at psyching myself up rang hollow. Of course I was nervous about this. I'd spent a huge amount of time talking to Dima. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life talking to Dima, and then he'd brought all those happy dreams to a crashing halt. I couldn't even begin to pretend I was indifferent about it. Our video call was supposed to start at 6 p.m. Georgia time. That would be 1 a.m. in Moscow. I'd pointed that out and asked if we could move it to sometime earlier in the day, but Dima had said it was fine. He'd be happy to get up in the middle of the night to talk to a source. "Still suffering from that insomnia," he'd written to me. "Still suffering from those taut sales. Frankly, Ina, it will be a relief to not have to try to sleep through the night." That didn't sound very healthy to me at all, but this was his story, so I kept my mouth shut. Nagging Dima about taking care of himself was a counterproductive action in the extreme. I ate an early supper in order to stave off low blood sugar during the call, and then regretted it. My stomach was now gurgling unhappily as I waited by my laptop. I reminded myself that one of the benefits of a video call was that I could just mute myself and run to the bathroom whenever I needed to. I just didn't want to need to. I wanted everything to go perfectly smoothly, and Skype blooped on. I answered the call. "Hello, Ina," said Dima. "You look great. I've missed you." Chapter 50. "I've missed you too," I said through numb lips. Then Camilla blooped onto the screen, followed quickly by Raoul. I made the introductions and allowed Raoul to start talking. Raoul was a slender man with large, intelligent eyes and dark hair that he still kept buzzed short on the sides. Like Camilla, he also spoke with a North Carolina drawl with a tiny hint of Mexico underneath. I had already heard the basic outlines of his story from Camilla. After he'd gotten out of the military, he'd gone looking for work. The first work he'd found was with Security Solutions. "First as a prison guard," he said, "but after a couple of months of that, they said they saw potential in me and offered me a chance to move up in the world." This initially meant private security. Then, after a couple more months of that, he'd been taken to their private training camp, where he'd been told about some of their more, private operations. "They're looking to get into the mercenary business," he told us. "It's a profitable global market. Or it could be, except that U.S.-trained soldiers cost a lot. Some companies cut costs by hiring guys from Venezuela, places like that. Security Solutions decided to try something different. Instead of hiring guys that had already been trained, they'd hire people with less experience and give them the training themselves. So they started recruiting from militia groups." We all nodded. "Of course, those guys think they're hot stuff, but most of them don't actually know shit. Sorry, ma'am." Raoul gave me an apologetic look. "No worries," I said. "It's hardly the first time I've heard that word." He smiled faintly. "So they need lots of training. And at first Security Solutions was using their own guys to do it. But then they came up with a better, solution." He paused. We all nodded encouragingly. "So, I guess you all know," now he gave Dima an uncertain glance, "about the situation in, Ukraine." Dima and I nodded emphatically. "So, it's it's complicated. Originally, I thought it was, your archetypal good versus evil situation. Like the evil Russian Empire attacking poor little Ukraine." He gave Dima and me both another apologetic look. "Believe me, there's normally a lot of truth in that story," said Dima. "But then Security Solutions started bringing in their new trainers. From Ukraine. Battle-hardened soldiers from the ATO, the anti-terrorist operation in eastern Ukraine, they said. We nodded some more. And I guess that was all true, but... Raoul's voice rose with indignation as he came to the crux of the story. Some of them were wearing the same Nazi shit that the militia guys were. And then Security Solutions started sending guys over there for training, and they'd come back even more indoctrinated in that shit than before. Like, I fucking kid you not, some of them were going around Sieg Heiling and shit. Like, right in front of the rest of us. Although, considering what just happened with the election just now and all, I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised. Anyway, when some of us complained about it, we were basically told to go fuck off. They said we were imagining things, or it wasn't that bad, or shit like that. Ah, I said. I translated it for Dima, although he'd been nodding along like he'd understood at least part of it already. Yes, he said when I was done. It is hard to tell people here about it. It is a constant problem for us journalists. We're not supposed to talk about it much in our articles, and if we send in pictures of Ukrainian soldiers with Nazi symbols on their uniforms, the editors normally tell us that they can't print those pictures. We don't want to feed Russian propaganda, they say. Dima's mouth quirked. Some people at a certain brick-red square in central Moscow would be very surprised to hear that I am guilty of feeding Russian propaganda. They're too busy accusing me of feeding Ukrainian and American propaganda. Raoul looked like he only partially understood what Dima was talking about, but didn't want to ask in case it plunged him into deeper waters than he felt comfortable swimming. So anyway, said Raoul after a moment, I realized I'd fallen in with a bunch of fucking white supremacists. Sometimes some of the trainers would talk about how they were defending European values from Russia. But by European values, they meant fucking fascism and white supremacy. Dima and I both nodded emphatically again. Camilla looked faintly sick, even though she'd heard the story before. So anyway, Raoul continued, some of the trainers were sent off to Ukraine, like I said, as a special perk kind of thing for special training. And when they got back, they were worse than ever. I mean, most of them didn't get in my face too much, although a few of them did. But I was seeing more and more that what was going on, it just wasn't right. Like, it seemed like Security Solutions was, it sounds crazy when I say it, but that's what it seemed like. It seemed like they were training these guys to become like jihadists or something. Whatever you call white supremacist jihadists. Yeah, they were training them to be bodyguards and soldiers for hire, but I heard them drop some stuff when they thought I wasn't listening that suggested maybe they were doing something else, something more sinister, too. Tell me, said Dima, did you ever hear anyone mention an organization called Kovboyets? Raoul frowned when I translated it. Then his eyes lit up and he nodded. Yeah, only they didn't say it like that. Actually, the trainers they'd brought over from Ukraine did, I guess. But the American guys didn't, so it took me a second. But yeah, I think that's what they were saying. I only heard them a couple of times. I couldn't figure out what they were talking about, not really. Just that Kovboyets had it all figured out, and we could be looking at a merger. Ah, said Dima. He looked extremely satisfied. What is Kovboyets, if you don't mind me asking? Said Raoul. Another mercenary company, Dima explained, but from the North Caucasus. Raoul looked like that didn't enlighten him too much, but he nodded anyway. They have global ambitions, Dima said, like your Security Solutions. A merger could make sense for both firms, although politically there could be some political problems. But with enough money, perhaps those political problems could be solved. Enough money can solve any problem, said Raoul. Dima shrugged. I guess he was thinking that there were some problems that money couldn't solve. He told me so himself several times. When you spent all your time seeing the kind of crimes the very rich could commit, and how unhappy they were as they were committing them, you lost faith in the power of money. Or at least, he'd always said so. This was normally as part of his explanation for why we were sharing a 2-room apartment with his mother. I'd never complained about it, but he'd felt the need to justify himself at least once a year even so. Dima asked a few more questions, but Raoul had left Security Solutions shortly after that. His new company, he said, worked in the same general area, but they weren't actively recruiting and training neo-Nazi white supremacists, so that was a step up as far as he was concerned. "I'm very grateful for your help," Dima told him at the end. "Can I talk to you again if I have more questions?" Raoul looked suddenly uncertain. Is my name going to appear anywhere?" "Not if you don't want it to," Dima told him. Raoul didn't look like he put much faith in Dima's promise, but there wasn't much he could do about it now, so he agreed, sure, Dima could contact him if he had more questions, and he'd think about answering them. "Great," said Dima. "I'm very grateful. And to you too, Camila. And to you, Ina. Ina, can we talk for a moment after this?" "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to." Chapter 51. Raoul and Camilla left the call. Dima and I stayed on. "Really, Ina, you do look great," he told me once we were alone again. "How's Polya?" I asked. He looked startled. It was a rare look for him. I savored it. "I don't know," he said after a moment. "Oh?" "Yeah." Now he was looking sheepish. It was an even rarer look for him. "She said, 'Ina, you warned me, and Mama warned me, but I didn't listen. She said she didn't think I really cared about her at all. I was just using her, and she didn't want to be in a relationship with me if that was the case, so she was going to dump me. Then she said we'd never really been in a relationship anyway, so she couldn't actually dump me, but she'd break off contact with me, which was as close as she could get, so—" "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "Really?" "Well, no. That always seemed like a terrible idea to me from the start." "Yeah, Mama kept telling me the same thing. I wanted to do right by everyone. But instead, I screwed up big time, didn't I?" "Well," I said. "Ina," he said sternly, "even your angelic patience has to come to an end at some point. Let it be now." "Well," I said again, "okay, but I don't know. I've made a lot of mistakes too." "Not as many as me." "I'm just full of doubts right now," I said, "so I don't want to condemn others." "Full of doubts about what?" he asked. "About me. About whether I'm a good person. Is this what you wanted to discuss?" "No, but this is ridiculous. You doubting that you're a good person. That's, why a nurse—" "Sometimes it's good to doubt," I said, "and maybe neither of us know me as well as we thought. Anyway, what did you want to discuss?" "Mostly I wanted to talk to you, Ina. Just talk. But since you're asking, I wanted to tell you a little more about what I've found out. I thought it might help me to talk it over with you. And I'm a little worried about you, to be honest." A jolt went through me. "Worried? Why?" "What this Raoul told us only confirmed what I'd already suspected. Security Solutions are mixed up in some pretty dangerous stuff. And you're involved with some, aren't you?" "Well," I said, Only on paper, really. Yes, they donated a bunch of money to the university, but that's it.
And they belong to the most powerful family in the university.
Yes, that too, I agreed.
Whose son you got into big trouble.
Well, yes, I admitted.
So they have reason to come after you, personally.
Well, I suppose so, but they haven't yet. I mean, that would be awfully obvious. I don't think they're going to do something like that.
They might not try to get you fired, Ina. That might be too obvious for them, yes. Although they might be that obvious. But they might arrange something else for you. Some kind of accident or something.
I laughed. Surely not.
Why not?
Well, most people don't do that kind of thing here. Especially not to people like me. I'm nobody.
A nobody who got the son of the owner of Security Solutions in big trouble. Maybe ruined his life.
I think he ruined his life himself, I countered.
That's not how they think, Ina.
True, I conceded. But, I mean, I'm no fan of Security Solutions, but I have a hard time believing they'd break the law like that.
I don't. Dima's voice was forceful. I'm sure they present a good front. But you heard what this Raoul said. These are not good people. These are not nice people. And they're joining up with Kovbayets, who are about as not nice as it's possible for people to me. All this Mr. Anthony Wainwright II has to do is mention his little problem to his new friends at Kovbayets, and they'll take care of it. No muss, no fuss, no blood on his hands.
Yeah, but... Okay, yes, I'm sure they're all terrible. How much danger do you think I'm really in? And what do you think I should do?
Dima's face was somber. I don't know, Ina. Other than be careful. Don't draw their attention to you. Don't go anywhere by yourself or do anything where you might find yourself likely to have a convenient accident. Mama and I are hoping to get our visas soon. We could be with you as soon as next month. Until then, be very, very careful.
I will, I promised.
And if you do happen to hear anything, let me know, will you?
I will, I promised again. Hey, by the way, since we're talking about this kind of thing, what do you know about a group called Glorious Future?
His face went still. I only know a little about them, but what I know I don't like. Why do you ask?
A former student has been asking about them. I just wondered if you happen to know anything interesting.
Not much, but it's probably not a good sign that they've come up in my current investigation. So please, please, Ina, be careful.
I will, I promised, as careful as I can be. Chapter 52. I ended the call with Dima feeling a mixture of elated, stressed, elated, terrified, and elated. Then I felt annoyed with myself. So Polya had broken up with him, although they'd apparently never been in a real relationship anyway, so she couldn't have actually broken up with him, which was wonderful, wonderful news. I tried to stop that train of thought. I was getting ahead of myself. I needed to have a good hard think about what I really wanted and what was actually good for me before I decided that getting back together with Dima was a good idea. And then I needed to have a little self-counseling session to figure out if it was even feasible and how I would cope if it didn't work out. The warning he'd given me I immediately dismissed. Then I told myself that maybe I should be taking it more seriously. He wasn't wrong. I had pissed off the head of Security Solutions, I assumed, and bad things could happen as a result. I'd been blithely assuming that U.S. legal processes would protect me from retaliation, and so far I'd seen no sign of it anyway. Anthony Wainwright III, the son and heir of the owner of Security Solutions, was currently being prosecuted for multiple counts of sexual assault and maybe some drug-related charges as well. And yes, I was the one, or at least one of the ones, who'd gotten him caught. But there'd been surprisingly little blowback for me so far. The university was too busy distancing themselves from the whole affair and loudly proclaiming their innocence to come after me. But that didn't mean that someone wouldn't come after me. And if Security Solutions was in fact working with Kovboyets, well, Kovboyets had people who did that kind of thing. A jolt of fear went through me as I thought that. I wasn't afraid of Security Solutions, but I was afraid, viscerally afraid, of Kovboyets. I found myself thinking of how to convince them not to come after me, that I wasn't going to do anything to bother them. But the problem was that I'd already done what I'd done. For all I knew, the Wainwright family had sworn blood vengeance against me and was just waiting for the right time to send Kovboyets after me. Don't be ridiculous, and don't panic. It all sounded so remote and over the top, and yet it could happen. There just wasn't a lot I could do about it, other than take those basic safety precautions Dima had recommended. And in the meantime, I told myself, you have that observation and performance evaluation to look forward to. Chapter 53. No one leapt out at me as I got into my car the next morning, or rammed into me as I drove onto campus, or met me with a hail of gunfire as I got out of the car and started my slow way towards Bedford Hall. More's the pity. I didn't really mean that, but I would have welcomed almost any non-lethal way to get out of the observation and evaluation. Since Mel was leaving straight from campus to go to her family's place in South Carolina, we were driving separately. This meant I had to park my car in the faculty lot and hobble all the way past the stadium and the dorms to the central quad. I could do it, and without crutches, which was a vast improvement over the start of the semester, but it still wasn't easy or pleasant. On the other hand, since I had stopped going to PT, my pain levels had decreased dramatically, so that was something. Karen had, with surprising good sense, elected to observe my first-year class, where the students didn't know her, rather than return to face Jackson and the rest of the gang in second year. So I had all of my 9 a.m. class to stew and sweat before she showed up for the 10 a.m. class. Miranda provided some welcome distraction during the first class. "Oh, Professor," she said when I came in. "I wanted to thank you. That friend of yours, you know, the journalist, he finally got in touch with me. I had an email from him waiting for me when I got up this morning. Finally, something good. You know I've been in such a funk ever since the election, but now it feels like maybe there's something right in the world again." My first, supremely irrational, emotion was jealousy. I hadn't had an email from Dima waiting for me when I'd gotten up this morning. Then I told myself how ridiculous that was. Dima and I had actually video talked last night. And I doubted he would be interested in Miranda in that way. And, "Can you take a look at the email, Professor?" she continued. "I think I understand it, but I'm not sure. And I'm kind of nervous, to be honest. Can you help me write the response? And, if he asks to talk to me, can you help translate?" I gave my jealousy a small, triumphant smile. "Sure," I said. I glanced at the clock. 8:59. "I've got class right after this, and then a meeting, but maybe we can meet after that." "Can you do it at the end of class? It should only take a minute. It's not a long email, and I think I got most of it already." I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to." Miranda settled into her seat, looking happy. Everyone else squeezed in where they could, and we started reviewing the instrumental case. Or learning it for the first time, since half the students reacted to it as if they'd never seen it before in their lives. Everyone but Miranda scrambled for the exit as soon as I called an end to the lesson at 8:48, glad to leave 2 minutes early. Miranda came over to me and showed me the email from Dima. Sure enough, it was very short.
Esteemed Miranda, your professor, Rowena Halley, has said you are interested in journalism and would like to speak with me about it. I would be happy to answer any of your questions I am able to. Let's set up a time to talk. Perhaps Professor Halley will be so kind as to interpret for us if necessary. With respect, Dima Kuznetsov.
Miranda had managed to get about 80% of it. It was, she told me, a great personal triumph. But she also felt totally out of her depth actually responding or communicating with him in any way. Could I help? Sure, I said. Why don't we work on an answer together? But later. I've got class now. Oh, but I've got to head out soon to join the fam for Thanksgiving. Maybe you could just give me a few hints right now? It should only take a minute. I looked up to see Karen coming in through the classroom door. 5 minutes early, which was unlike her. But maybe she'd learned to arrive early in order to get the best spot. Looks like I've got a guest. Can we email about it later? Okay, sounds good. Talk to you then. Miranda turned and saw Karen. Her face twisted up in an inadvertent expression of extreme dislike. Karen's own face mirrored the expression with almost comic accuracy. Bye, said Miranda, and rushed out of the room. That girl, said Karen once Miranda was gone. She shook her head. You know, Rowena, you certainly got some of the hardest students in the college. I have to hand it to you for sticking with them for so long. This is, what, your 3rd semester with that Aronson girl? I said. Yeah. And she actually seems to like you. Karen sounded more wondering than accusatory. Were you helping her with some extra work there as I was coming in? I said, yeah, I put her in touch with a journalist I know. Because, she's interested in journalism. Karen nodded. That's just the kind of thing we like to see Crimson faculty doing. Oh, I said. That's great. I resisted the urge to go over and see if there was some sign that Karen had been abducted by aliens or replaced with a robot simulacrum. I found myself examining her out of the corner of my eye as I erased the board and wrote up bullet points for the next class. No sign of a charging port that I could see. I wasn't sure what kind of visible marks alien abduction was supposed to leave. The students for my 10 a.m. class filed in and took their seats. I started class. Karen sat there quietly, her face as close to pleasantly neutral as a face like hers could be, occasionally making brief notes to herself. Sometimes she gave a faint smile as she made the notes. Not a smirk of delight at catching someone out in an error, but a smile of appreciation for a job well done. It was so unnerving I had a hard time concentrating on teaching. When class was over and all the students had filed back out, Karen stood up, gave me another vague smile, said, "Come by and see me when you're ready, Rowena," and left. I started erasing the board. What on earth, I asked myself, had gotten into her? And what diabolical action did it presage? Chapter 54. Karen looked up from her computer as I stepped into her office a few minutes later. She gave me another smile. It was a bland, slightly weird smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. Even more unnerved than before, I looked around her office, searching for clues. The same disheveled piles of books, gradebooks, papers, notes, and trash still covered every available surface, including the chair. I removed a stack of stained quizzes from its seat and sat down. I felt the back of my trousers catch on whatever the sticky thing was that had never been cleaned off that chair. Oh, goody. "Well, Rowena," Karen said, "I'm very pleased to say that you have obviously implemented my suggestions from my previous observations. I saw real improvement in your teaching today. I was particularly pleased since I know this is a very trying time for everyone. Things are very divisive right now because of the election. But your students all got along great. As I said, you've improved by leaps and bounds since you've started here." I said, "That's, great." I thought about asking what, exactly, she had seen. I'd taught exactly the same as I always did. My hackles were also starting to rise, just as they always did around her. It was good to know she probably hadn't been body snatched, at least. "Yes." Now she did smirk, just a little, and then she caught it before it spread all over her face. "I have to say, at first I wasn't sure if you were going to be able to raise yourself up to the crimson standard, but I'm extremely pleased to say that I think you have the makings of an excellent crimson faculty member, given the right kind of mentoring." "Oh," I said. "I'm, glad to hear it." "Yes. And speaking of such things, while I have you here, I wanted to talk to you about your candidacy for our tenure track position." "Uh-huh." Cold sweat started trickling down my sides. I shifted in my seat, and then regretted it as my trousers ripped free of the sticky thing with a faintly rude noise. "Yes, I'm very pleased to inform you that the committee was favorably impressed by your application, and we would like to invite you to a first-round interview this winter." "Oh," I said, "that's great." It should have been the most sincere thing I'd said in a while. Instead, a wave of dread washed over me. An interview. Ugh! And if it went absolutely perfectly, then I would probably have another extremely grueling round of interviews to follow. And if all that went great, then I would end up working here at Crimson for the rest of my life, or at least the next several years. And it sounded like being mentored by Karen. The prospect was stark. "Yes, I can really see you joining our happy Crimson family for the long term, Rowena." "I'd be delighted to," I said. Chapter 55. I limped out of Karen's office and made my slow way out the building and towards the parking lot. I tried to tell myself I should be pleased. I should actually, for once, be delighted, just like I kept saying I was. But I wasn't. Partly, I was annoyed, no, I was enraged, with what I now saw to be Karen's manipulation. She'd played bad cop all along, and now she had switched to good cop in order to show me and everyone else what a great mentor she was. We'd just moved on to the next phase of the hazing process, where she laid off the active attacks and started bringing me into the group now that I'd been sufficiently broken down and was willing to accept the group's hierarchy and dynamics. But I really needed this job, so I'd have to go along with it. Maybe for a few more months, maybe for the rest of my working life. Maybe 10 or 15 years from now, I'd be the one hazing new faculty and acting like an asshole in the corner office. Because maybe I was bad. I thought about that picture of Karen I'd seen at my previous visit. For a while, she'd been a lot like me. She'd said so, and for once, I was sure she was being sincere. No, that wasn't right. I was pretty sure she was almost always sincere. It was just that her sincerity generally came from a place of meanness and brokenness. We'd all be a lot better off if she learned to be a little less sincere. I assumed that another major driver behind her sudden niceness was that they'd seen the candidate pool for the tenure-track job and realized that it would be hard to replace me. While there were probably 10 qualified Russian professors for every decent position, most people didn't consider a job in small-town Georgia to be a decent position. The competition would be much less than for a job in the Mid-Atlantic. As I'd guessed all along, there was probably hardly anyone actually available who could do the job I was doing. On one level, that made me feel better. Unless something absolutely terrible happened, there was an excellent chance that I had the job, providing I could make myself jump through all the hoops ahead of me. On another level, it was forcing me to realize just how little I wanted to stay here for much longer. Even nice Karen made my hairs bristle, and all the other decent colleagues I had didn't make up for that. And while I didn't hate Greenfields, I had a hard time imagining myself living here for another 10, 20, or 30 years. I supposed it might be all right for people who already had families. Property prices were low, and the area was generally safe, so a family could, for example, get a nice little farm on the edge of town and raise goats or alpacas or something as their hobby. But for an unwillingly single person, Greenfields was a dead zone. My reluctant forays into dating apps had only underscored how few potential partners there were within a 2-hour drive of here. Taking this job would probably mean saying goodbye to any hopes I might still entertain of ever finding love or having a family. Maybe the FBI will come through. They hadn't yet, though. I knew it was a slow process, but I had to assume the fact that I hadn't heard a peep from them for months was a bad sign. They had probably gotten bogged down in my background check and were now seriously second-guessing their decision to consider me at all. Weirdly, ridiculously, crazily, horribly, it looked like my best bet for a steady paycheck was going to be my abusive old flame, academia.